My sister was crying in my driveway when I understood that whatever had been happening quietly for years had finally reached a point where it could no longer be controlled with charm. She wasn't crying in the way she usually did, not with careful pauses or lowered eyes, or the subtle performance that invited comfort without consequences. This was different. Her body looked wrong somehow, like it had forgotten how to hold itself upright, shoulders folding inward as she clutched a cardboard box against her chest with both arms, as if letting go of it might cause everything else to fall apart too. For a long moment, I didn't move. I was halfway out the door, barefoot, keys still in my hand, running late for a day that had already begun to feel too heavy, and there was something disorienting about seeing my sister like this, unannounced, unprepared, her face blotchy and swollen, hair pulled back unevenly like she'd started getting ready and then lost track of time or control. She never came to my house without a reason, and she never came without rehearsing. "I brought them," she said, before I could ask anything, her voice breaking hard on the last word. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. The box answered for her. It was taped badly, uneven strips crossing over each other like she'd done it in a hurry, and as she held it out to me, her hands started to shake, not from the weight, but from the effort of keeping herself together long enough to finish whatever this was. "The documents," she whispered, lowering her voice as if the word itself might draw attention. "All of them." That was when I noticed the car. Parked at the curb behind her, engine off, windows tinted just enough to hide the person inside. It didn't belong to the neighborhood. It wasn't familiar in the way you recognize neighbors' cars without thinking about it. This one felt intentional. Waiting. My sister saw me glance at it and flinched, so quickly it was almost invisible. "They came to my house," she said, rushing the words together. "This morning." "Who?" I asked. She shook her head sharply, like saying it out loud would make it real. I took the box from her. It was heavier than paper should be, not physically, but in that way you feel when years of small decisions, little omissions, quiet justifications finally stack up into something that can't be carried discreetly anymore. The moment the box left her hands, her shoulders sagged, like she'd been holding her breath for months. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, staring at the ground. That sentence hit me with a dull familiarity. My sister had always said versions of it after the fact, once there was no way to undo what she'd done. She never meant harm. She never meant consequences. She never meant for anyone to notice. I stepped aside and let her follow me inside, because even then, some old reflex still guided me. The reflex to contain things, to keep scenes from spilling into public view, to manage chaos quietly so other people didn't have to acknowledge it existed. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh laundry, the safe, boring smell of routine, and the box sat between us on the coffee table like a third presence neither of us wanted to acknowledge directly. My sister wouldn't look at it. She sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, hands clasped too tightly, eyes flicking toward the window every few seconds, as if she were watching time pass instead of sunlight. "There's more," she said finally. "There's a statement." That word landed differently than the others. Statement, not explanation, not apology. Paper. Months earlier, on a day when exhaustion had blurred into something close to desperation, I'd wandered into a small, dusty shop tucked between a nail salon and a closed bakery, not because I believed in fortune tellers, but because I needed a place where no one knew my family, my history, or the version of me I was supposed to be. The woman there hadn't interrupted me once, She hadn't rushed me, or softened my words, or corrected my tone. When I finished talking, she looked at me calmly and said, "She will apologize, but not with tears, with paper." I'd smiled politely and forgotten about it. Sitting across from my sister now, fear written plainly across her face, the box between us like a confession she hadn't meant to make, I understood exactly what that woman had meant. This was the apology, and it hadn't arrived because my sister felt sorry. It had arrived because something had finally scared her. My phone vibrated in my pocket, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and I didn't need to look at the screen to know it wasn't casual. Moments like this don't coexist with harmless calls. I didn't answer it yet. I watched my sister instead. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but diminished, like the confidence she'd always worn so easily had cracked, leaving her unsure how to stand without it. "I need you to take them," she said, nodding toward the box. "I need you to read everything." "Why?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "Because you were right." The words sounded wrong coming from her mouth, like a language she'd never bothered to learn. I didn't reach for the box again. I let the silence stretch, because silence has a way of pulling truths out of people when they've run out of scripts. Her eyes flicked toward the window again, toward the waiting car. "They said I had to," she added quickly. "They said if I didn't bring everything back, it would be worse." "They," I repeated. She nodded, tears spilling over now, uncontained. "The bank, and someone else." That was when I took my phone out and listened to the voicemail I'd missed. A man's voice, calm and measured, the kind of voice that doesn't rush because it doesn't need to. "Ms. Hart, this is Detective Alvarez. Please call me back regarding a matter involving your family. It's important." I didn't tell my sister what the message said. I didn't have to. Her body already knew. "I never wanted to hurt Mom," she said suddenly, panic rising in her voice. "I was just trying to manage things." I looked at her, then, really looked, and something settled into place with uncomfortable clarity. This hadn't been about helping. It had been about control, about deciding who signed, who spoke, who was believed when stories conflicted. I picked up the box and opened it. Folders, statements, copies of signatures. At the top, an envelope with my sister's handwriting, my mother's name. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to. Because the moment I saw it, I understood something my sister still hadn't. Whatever she'd been doing quietly, confidently, for years, had crossed a line she couldn't step back from. And the most dangerous thing about people like my sister isn't that they lie. It's that they assume the people who stay quiet will never collect enough truth to speak back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand how she ended up here, crying in my driveway with a box of evidence and no exits left, you have to understand how our family worked, why everyone trusted her instincts, and why my silence was never the weakness she thought it was. In our family, trust didn't have to be earned. It was assigned. My sister received it the way some people receive good lighting, effortlessly, without asking, without even noticing it was there. She was expressive, emotional in a way that read as depth rather than volatility, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and sent long messages at just the right moment so people felt seen without ever noticing how little of her inner life she actually shared in return. I was trusted differently. I was trusted the way you trust a locked door, not because it's warm or welcoming, but because it has never failed you before. From the time we were young, the division was clear without anyone ever spelling it out. My sister was the one people worried about. Her moods were discussed. Her disappointments were treated like events that required careful handling and group consensus. If she cried, someone sat with her. If she struggled, someone stepped in. I was the one who adapted. Adults praised me for being easy. Teachers called me independent. Relatives smiled and said, "She'll be fine," in a tone that closed the conversation completely. And because I was fine, no one ever checked what it cost. I learned early how to disappear into responsibility, how to take care of things quietly so no one had to think about them, how to read a room and adjust myself until nothing felt heavy for anyone else. My sister learned something else entirely. She learned how to take up space without apology. So when our mother began forgetting small things, it didn't register as a crisis at first. It arrived disguised as inconvenience, a missed appointment, a bill paid twice, a question repeated with a small, embarrassed laugh that invited reassurance rather than concern. My sister brushed it off. "She's just tired," she said. "Everyone forgets things. You worry too much." I didn't argue. I watched. I noticed how our mother started hesitating in doorways, eyes unfocused, as if she'd forgotten what she'd gone there to do. I noticed how she wrote reminders to herself in careful handwriting, and then forgot where she'd put the notes. I noticed how her confidence drained away before her memory did, how she began deferring to whoever sounded most certain. That person was my sister. When the doctors stopped using comforting language and started using careful language, the room went quiet. Words like monitoring and early changes hovered without landing anywhere solid. My sister sighed and rubbed her temples. "I don't think I can handle this," she said. "I just don't have the emotional capacity." No one contradicted her. They looked at me instead. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a discussion. It was recognition. I moved our mother into my house. At first, my sister was present in all the ways that photographed well. She brought flowers. She cooked meals she didn't stay long enough to clean up after. She posted smiling pictures online with captions about family and gratitude. People praised her for being involved. People praised me for being strong. Gradually, the visits shortened. Work was busy. Traffic was terrible. She was exhausted. Caregiving doesn't announce itself as sacrifice. It settles in quietly, reshaping your days until you don't remember what your life looked like before everything revolved around medication schedules, appointment reminders, and nights broken into pieces by alarms and worry. I adjusted. That was what I did. My sister stayed involved just enough to look responsible. She called often, her voice full of concern. "How's Mom today?" "Are you sleeping at all?" "You can't burn yourself out like this." Then she started offering solutions. "Let me handle the finances. It'll be easier if one person manages the paperwork. You already have so much on your plate." I hesitated. Money inside families is dangerous territory, especially for women. Questioning it makes you look ungrateful. Asking for transparency makes you look suspicious. And I was tired of being the one who complicated things when everyone else seemed relieved that someone was stepping up. So I said yes. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Bills were paid, statements came addressed to her. She summarized things casually, confidently, like she was reading me the weather. "All good," she'd say. "Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe her. Believing her meant I could focus on keeping our mother safe. But small things began to bother me. Our mother would ask if she'd already helped my sister this month, confusion flickering across her face like static. Or she'd mention giving money and then forget why, her voice tightening with uncertainty. When I asked my sister about it, she laughed. "Oh my God," she said. "You can't take everything she says seriously. She's confused." She said it gently, protectively, as if she were shielding me from my own imagination. When I asked to see statements, her tone changed. "Why are you interrogating me? I thought we were on the same team. I'm trying to help, and you're making this harder than it needs to be." That word, team, worked the way it always had. It made me pause. Because families like ours didn't accuse. They smoothed things over. They redirected. They avoided discomfort. Around that time, something else shifted. My sister started talking about me to other people. Not directly, not cruelly, strategically. "She's exhausted," she told relatives. "She's very emotional about this. I worry she's not seeing things clearly." It sounded like concern. It was positioning. I noticed it the day an aunt pulled me aside and asked if I was holding up okay, her eyes scanning my face like she was searching for cracks. A story was being written about me. One where I was overwhelmed. One where I was unreliable. One where someone else might need to step in for everyone's good. I didn't confront my sister. I didn't defend myself. I did what I had always done. I paid attention. Caregiving teaches you to notice patterns before they become emergencies. And once you start applying that skill outside the role it was meant for, you begin seeing things you can't unsee. I noticed how my sister discouraged paper statements, calling them clutter. I noticed how she preferred handling things in person, where nothing left a trail. I noticed how she spoke for our mother, even when our mother was sitting right there. And most of all, I noticed how comfortable she had become. Comfort makes people careless. It makes them reuse explanations. It makes them forget who's watching. By the time I understood that my sister wasn't improvising but building something carefully and deliberately, it was already too late to pretend this was a misunderstanding. This wasn't about help. It was about control, about deciding who would be believed when questions finally surfaced. And the most dangerous part was this. Everyone already trusted her. They always had. Which meant that when the truth finally came into the light, it wasn't going to arrive gently. It was going to arrive all at once. And when it did, someone was going to be standing in the wrong place. She just didn't know yet that it wouldn't be me. I didn't go looking for proof right away. That part surprises people when I tell the story later, because they imagine a moment where something snaps, where I suddenly become sharp and strategic and decisive. But the truth is quieter than that, and much slower, and much more uncomfortable to live inside. What actually happened was that I stopped explaining myself. I stopped correcting people when they misunderstood me. I stopped defending my choices. I stopped rushing to fill silences my sister seemed increasingly eager to control. And in that space, something changed. It started with my mother. One evening, as I was clearing dishes from the table, she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. Not confusion, not anxiety, but something like careful concentration. "Did I already give your sister money this week?" she asked. It wasn't the question itself that unsettled me. It was her tone. There was no embarrassment in it, no laughter meant to soften the moment. There was only concern, deliberate and precise, like she was trying very hard to hold on to a thread she didn't trust to stay in her hands much longer. I didn't answer immediately. I finished what I was doing first, because I'd learned that sudden reactions frightened her more than uncertainty. "Why do you ask?" I said. She folded her hands together in her lap, staring down at them as if the answer might be written there. "I feel like I keep helping," she said slowly, choosing each word with effort. "But I don't remember what for, and when I ask, she gets irritated." Something in my chest went still. Up until that moment I had been thinking in terms of numbers and explanations and vague discomfort, but this was different. This wasn't about money. This was about pressure, about teaching someone that questions were dangerous, that curiosity created tension, that compliance was the safest option when you weren't entirely sure what was happening anymore. I sat beside my mother and took her hand. "You're allowed to ask," I said quietly. "You never need permission for that." She nodded, but I could see how unsure she still was, how deeply the habit of self-doubt had already begun to settle into her. That night, after she went to bed, I opened the notebook I'd been keeping without admitting to myself that it mattered. It wasn't dramatic, just dates, amounts, comments written down without judgment. I read through it slowly, without emotion, the way you do when you're afraid of what you might see if you rush. And for the first time, the shape of it emerged. Not chaos, not confusion, a pattern. Withdrawals that aligned with visits, explanations that repeated with minor variations, decisions made quickly, always framed as urgent, always positioned as helpful. It wasn't sloppy, it was practiced. Once I saw it, I started noticing other things too. The way my sister discouraged paper statements, calling them unnecessary clutter. The way she insisted on being present for conversations that didn't involve her. The way she answered questions for my mother before my mother had time to speak. I began asking questions, gently, carefully, never accusing. When did that change? Can I see that? Who suggested this? Each time, my sister's patience shortened. Her voice tightened. You're being dramatic. You're projecting your stress. I'm just trying to help. And then, without my realizing it at first, she shifted her focus. She stopped trying to convince me. She started preparing everyone else. She's exhausted, she told relatives. She's too emotionally involved. I worry she's not thinking clearly anymore. It sounded like concern. It was positioning. The first time I heard it, I felt something sharp and personal twist in my chest. The second time, I felt clarity. She wasn't reacting to me. She was planning around me. She was building a version of events where my questions would be framed as instability, my attention as obsession, my silence as something suspicious rather than careful. I didn't confront her. I didn't correct anyone. That was harder than it sounds. There is something deeply uncomfortable about being misunderstood and choosing not to fix it, especially when you've spent your life being the reliable one, the reasonable one, the person people expect to explain things away. But I remembered the woman in the small shop, the way she'd looked at me when she said, "Don't warn." So I didn't. Instead, I started collecting with intention. I made copies quietly whenever paperwork passed through my hands. I saved messages. I wrote down remarks that seemed harmless on their own, but unsettling in sequence. I noticed who hesitated. The bank employee whose smile faltered for just a moment when my sister's name came up. The notary who asked one extra question before signing. The neighbor who mentioned, casually, that my sister often came by when I wasn't home and always seemed rushed. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. And then, my sister overreached. She started talking about selling the house. Not as a discussion, as a conclusion. "She doesn't need all this space," she said one evening, leaning back like the decision had already been made. "It's not practical anymore." I waited. "We could sell it," she continued. "Put the money somewhere safe." Safe. The word landed heavily. "Where?" I asked. She waved her hand dismissively. "Investments, accounts, things you don't have to worry about." I looked at her then and understood something with sudden, uncomfortable clarity. The house anchored my mother to something tangible, something that couldn't be moved quickly or quietly. Selling it would turn stability into numbers, numbers that could shift without witnesses. That night, lying awake and listening to my mother breathe in the next room. I understood that if I didn't stop this, my sister wouldn't just take money. She would take choice. She would take dignity. She would take my mother's ability to question what was happening to her own life, and she would do it while convincing everyone she was being responsible. That was when I made a decision I didn't announce. I spoke to someone outside the family, not to accuse, not to dramatize, just to ask questions. I walked into that conversation with my notebook, my calm voice, and my lifelong habit of minimizing myself, and for the first time in months, the person across from me didn't try to soothe me or suggest I was imagining things. They looked at the information quietly. Then they said, "This looks like a pattern." Hearing it out loud changed everything, because once the truth stops being lonely, it stops being fragile. From that moment on, I wasn't documenting out of uncertainty. I was documenting with purpose. My sister was still moving forward, still confident, still certain I would hesitate the way I always had. She didn't realize that the moment she stopped being careful was the moment the ending began writing itself. And the next step she took, rushed, impatient, certain, was going to give me exactly what I needed. She just didn't know it yet. The end didn't arrive with confrontation. There was no raised voice, no dramatic exposure, no moment where I finally said the perfect sentence and watched it land exactly where it was supposed to. That kind of ending only exists in stories where people are paying attention the whole time. In real life, the end came because my sister rushed. After the conversation about the house, after I stopped pushing back and started agreeing more than I ever had before, she changed. Not in ways most people would notice, but in ways that mattered. She talked faster. She made plans further ahead. She stopped checking whether I was really following along, because she'd already decided that I was tired enough to give in. She scheduled an appointment without asking me. She framed it as a favor. "Just to make things easier," she said brightly. "So you don't have to carry everything anymore." I went. I sat beside her in a room designed to make decisions feel procedural instead of permanent. I watched her slide papers across a desk with practiced confidence, watched her point to signature lines she called formalities, watched her try to hurry the moment where control would officially change hands, and I didn't stop her. I asked for time. She hated that, but she gave it to me, because by then she believed time belonged to her. It didn't. What she didn't know was that the questions I'd asked outside the family had already started something she couldn't see. Quiet reviews, calm conversations, people looking at patterns instead of personalities, paperwork instead of stories. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was already too late to pretend nothing had happened. They went to her house first. She told me that herself, standing in my driveway with that box clutched to her chest, fear finally breaking through the composure she'd always relied on. She didn't come to explain. She didn't come to argue. She came to contain. Inside the box was her apology, not written to me, written to protect herself. A statement acknowledging mistakes, promising restoration, carefully outlining a version of events where no one had meant harm, and everything had simply become complicated. She never said my name. She didn't have to. The implication was clear. I had been close enough, tired enough, convenient enough to absorb responsibility if things went badly. I read the papers without rushing. I signed what needed to be signed, not to forgive her, to end it. She cried then, real tears this time, the kind that come when there's nothing left to negotiate. "I never wanted to be the bad one," she said. I believed her. She hadn't wanted to be bad. She'd wanted to be in control. The last document came days later. It was tucked into a folder she must have forgotten, written months earlier when she still believed she was untouchable. It described concerns about me, my judgment, my emotional state, my over-involvement. It was careful, quiet, administrative. Reading it didn't hurt the way I expected. It clarified. This had never been just about money. It had been about erasing me from the story just enough to decide how it ended. Once that document surfaced, everything else fell into place without me having to say a word. People stopped asking me questions meant to test my stability. They started asking her questions she couldn't answer. My sister moved away a few months later. No announcement, no explanation anyone challenged. She told people she needed a fresh start, that the situation had been exhausting, that she'd done her best. No one argued. They just listened differently now. She didn't lose everything. Life doesn't work that way. She lost access. She lost credibility. She lost the ability to quietly rewrite reality while everyone else was busy trying to keep the peace. My mother stayed with me. Her days didn't become easy, but they became calmer. Decisions were spoken out loud. Questions were welcomed. She stopped apologizing for needing help. One evening, long after everything had settled, I broke down the empty box and slid it into the recycling bin like any other piece of cardboard. Nothing dramatic. Just finished. I never went back to the fortune teller's shop. I didn't need to. She had been right about the only thing that mattered. The apology came, not with tears, with paper. And in the end, I didn't need revenge or public vindication or a final speech that made anyone uncomfortable. I waited. I paid attention. And when the truth finally ran out of places to hide, I was still standing, grounded, intact, and no longer carrying what had never belonged to me in the first place.